Good morning, everybody. My name is Pavel Diko, and I'll start the presentation. Then, halfway, I'll give the floor and microphone to my colleague Bartosz. So, as thanks for the nice welcome and introduction to all the ladies at the regulatory or running the regulatory reporting community. And for organizing this breakfast. So we'll be talking about the initiative or the work that we are doing on the strategy for supervisory data in EU financial services. Now, this is work in progress. We are developing this strategy, and in the next slide, I'll basically tell you a little bit about the what led to the strategy. Why are we working on reviewing, and why are we trying to improve or change the supervisory reporting in the financial sector? So about a year ago, a bit more, we finished a rather thorough and wide review of the reporting requirements in our domain, so in the financial domain. The exercise was called Fitness Check of Supervisory Reporting Requirements, and the nature of the fitness check exercise is to look horizontally at many pieces of legislation and evaluate them or look at them from one particular angle. And this fitness check was looking at the cross section of legislation in the financial domain, in banking, insurance, capital markets, and all of these pieces of legislation were evaluated looking from the perspective of reporting requirements, so to the supervisors, so supervisory reporting requirements. And so the results of the fitness check, which were published in a staff working document last November 2019, concluded also where that I'll spend a bit more time on this because not all the people in the audience may be familiar with the fitness check and these exercise. So the conclusions of the fitness check were that the reporting requirements actually are doing their job, so they are relevant, they are effective, they provide supervisor with the data they need to oversee the financial system, but they are not perfect, and especially in terms of efficiency and coherence. So the thing reporting we found could be done in a cheaper way or less burdensome way, say, and in such a way that data obtained from different frameworks could be combined and be interoperable better. And so main areas for improvement that we have identified in the fitness check were, the legislative process and of setting up, designing the requirements, and the legislative instruments that actually are used to lay these requirements out, the governance of the reporting, so the data, particularly data sharing between different recipients, the regular review of data needs and uses to identify data that may not be so relevant anymore or may be redundant, are not fit for purpose. Important area was consistency and harmonization between different reporting frameworks, so that the reporting entities don't have to calculate or reinvent the reporting for every particular framework, which asks for very similar data but not exactly the same. And finally, the last area was adapting the requirements for the use of technology, because these days nobody reports by submitting paper. Everything is done, really practically all reporting is done using IT. So adapting the requirements to keep this in mind was another area to look at. And so with these, equipped with these results of the fitness check, we now are set out on our journey to improve the reporting requirements in the financial sector. And so the broad roadmap of the follow-up to the fitness check is to formulate a long-term vision. So where we want to get, because this is a key thing, to avoid quick fixes or kind of ad hoc solutions to particular problems, because that was one of the messages we got from the fitness check, that doing things in an ad hoc way creates more problems in reporting than solves. So we first want to basically get an agreement that this is where that's where we want to get, and then we develop a strategy how to get there, prepare actions, and implement. Now, this is not living in a vacuum. We closely cooperate with a digital finance strategy, which is another initiative within DG FISMA, and European data strategy. Both of these are very announced this year. So European data strategy is a wider Commission initiative looking at creation of data spaces, and this links well with our goal of more data sharing and harmonization of reporting requirements. So this is the road ahead of us, and we are quite advanced in the first step, so that in the vision where we want to get, and I'll quickly present that, which will be summarized in the next two slides. So first, the long-term objectives are to deliver accurate, unambiguous, and timely data to supervisory authorities. That would enable them to monitor the financial system efficiently, but and effectively, and at the same time we want to minimize the costs and burden for the supervised entities, but also for the supervisors, because there is a trade-off between the two. So these are the objectives, and we think that the supervisory reporting environment should be based, to which we want to get to, on the following principles. Next slide, please. So first, we should start with the clear objectives for the reporting requirements, so that we know what we collect the data for, then express them in a very clear and common language across different frameworks within the financial domain, then develop them, the requirements, in collaboration with all the stakeholders. That includes the legislators, but also supervisors, and also the reporting entities themselves. So this is a key point we also learned from the fitness check. This should lead to zero duplication then between reporting requirements. So the data that we already have, we don't collect again, or similar, if we can reuse it, and which goes to the principle of data sharing. So once data is collected and shared between all the different supervisors involved, so that the amount of reporting is minimized. The requirements, as I said before, should be built with technology used to report in mind. And finally, they should be as stable as possible. Of course, taking into account the changing landscape of the markets and of the financial system. But what is also important, to give the time to all the actors in the reporting, so from the reporting entities up to supervisors, to adapt their system. So give visibility or some predictability of the changes in the reporting system. That is also important to reduce the burden and costs of the whole system. So these are the principles what the system should we think should follow. And so far we got kind of support and agreement from the people we consulted with. That kind of leaves several of the characteristics of the system open. So many systems or many approaches can be taken that satisfy these principles. And so for some issues that we need to resolve or questions that we have to answer before we get there is, do we want this reporting system to be centralized or distributed? How granular the data should be that is collected? Where is the right trade-off between harmonization of the data models and the agility of the supervisors to react to new developments? What are the good patterns or good practices for data flows, I mean, from the reporting entity to the national supervisor, then to European, or to European, then national centralized point, then to access to everybody. So there are several possibilities that need to be assessed. And as this links to the connection EU and national requirements. And finally, looking at technology, whether the current push system where reporting entities actually push the data to the supervisors, whether with the recent development in the technology, whether this could be changed into a different type of system, so which not be even called reporting, but kind of extraction of the data by the supervisors to satisfy their supervisory needs, so pool system. So all this is still to be decided, and what we plan to do, and we are working on it now in consultation with stakeholders. But we already have some ideas for actions, some initial ideas for actions that we think are necessary. We don't claim they are by any way complete strategy, but they would form part of it. And now I give the floor to my colleague Bartosz, who will run you through these initial ideas we have.
Thank you very much, Pavel. Good morning, everyone. Bartosz Dworak here. I will kind of take the second half of this presentation. But before I do, before I start, I see that there's an interesting question here in the chat already, asking to give us some kind of examples of what kind of regulatory financial reports we are talking about. And I think I saw a comment earlier on as well about whether this also concerns or reporting by traded financial entities or their annual reports. So maybe just a couple of clarification, what kind of to define how we see supervisory reporting. I realize we're kind of jumping into the middle of the presentation, but I think this might actually help understand the second half of the presentation better. So maybe I'll take this now. So indeed, there are, as you may have even seen just in this virtual breakfast, there are kind of different ways of I guess, referring to reporting that we talk about. You've seen regulatory reporting, you've seen supervisory reporting. I guess supervisory reporting can be considered as kind of a subset of regulatory reporting. As Pavel mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to stress that, I guess the reason we refer to it as supervisory reporting is because the reporting in the financial services sector is a little bit different than reporting in a lot of other, I think, DGs that may exist in the Commission. And I guess the primary difference here is that the Commission as such does not actually receive the data, but the data is received either by financial supervisory authorities or by national supervisory authorities, depending on the legislation, in potentially in different orders. And that's also something that Pavel just mentioned. That's about the data flows and how that data should transit between the different authorities. So we consider supervisory reporting, reporting by entities to the supervisory authorities for the purpose of supervision of these entities. We consider reporting to the public by traded entities as something different. We refer to that as disclosures. And although the fitness check did not cover disclosures as such, we are very conscious of the fact that these could be, there will be some similarities and there could be some linkages between them. So what we are doing now, looking at the strategy, again, it's not a key element of our work, but it's certainly something that we will probably keep in the back of our minds. So yes, primarily, again, to underline, we are talking about reporting by entities to the supervisory authorities for the purpose exactly of that, of supervision and of monitoring financial stability and things like that. So I hope that answers the questions, and I will now move on to the rest of the presentation. So yes, so Pavel gave you a little bit of the background and the kind of the vision and the principles, and indeed we are now starting to reflect about how we can implement that vision and how we can kind of put that strategy into focus and get it going. And we've had a number of initial that based on the findings. Now, I will touch on a few of them, but I think that it's important to kind of underline the fact that, again, as Pavel mentioned earlier, we are not yet, first of all, this is not written in stone. We are kind of only starting out on some of these actions. So these are, some of these are a little bit more advanced than others. Some are just broad outlines of what needs to happen, and we'll still need to think and discuss with stakeholders as far as the details are concerned. It's certainly not a complete list. Other things will certainly be necessary, and some may only kind of appear as we start to work on some others. So as we say here, several of them may be quite interdependent. And you'll see that some of the ideas that we have now are fairly focused already and really kind of limiting itself to one specific area. There are others that are quite cross-cutting and horizontal. And so we definitely will be looking for feedback, input from all of the stakeholders, whether that be industry or the supervisors, both at national and at EU level. And we have already started that discussion and a little bit more on that later. So please, next slide. So we'll start with something which is kind of more horizontal and rather internal facing, but it'll give you a bit of a kind of a basis, I guess, for the following work. The findings, as you saw, and as Pavel mentioned, showed that there are quite a lot of inconsistencies in how the reporting requirements are currently structured, how the terminology that is used, which leads to sometimes overlaps and a problem with coherence, basically, across the requirements. And what we found is that basically something that needs to happen from the very beginning is that when the supervisory reporting requirements are developed, there need to be some kind of basic guidelines and basic rules that need to be followed already at the kind of the policy officers, the commission stage, before it even moves to the secondary legislation that is developed by the European supervisory authorities for the really kind of technical aspects. So what we are thinking now of doing is actually creating a manual for drafting reporting requirements. This manual will be primarily internal facing, i.e. it will be aimed at the commission services. But I mean, we are open if it can be useful to other entities, to other authorities across the EU. By all means, we'd certainly be welcome, or we'd certainly be open to formulating in such a way that it can be useful to others as well. Now, what could this manual do? I think, again, it could give outlines to how the reporting requirements should actually be formulated and defined. So really go down to the level of, what terminology should be used, how to the level of whether it should say once a year or annual. So things like that. It can clarify how the consultation process could take place. One of the things that we've heard from the fitness check is that we don't actually consult far enough in advance, even before launching the idea of reporting requirements, and that this is something that should happen more often. So that's certainly something that we can provide some guidelines on. There is an issue of sometimes a kind of confusion between the level of detail that happens at the kind of what we call the level 1 legislation, which is the legislation adopted by the Commission, and the level 2 legislation, the technical aspects adopted by the European Supervisory Authority. So we can provide guidance on that. We can provide a bit more clarity on what kind of empowerment should be given to the European supervisory authorities for the technical level 2 legislation. Something that can also be addressed is the use of various international standards, things like that, whether that be various kind of ISO standards or any others that are used in the financial sector. And in terms of timelines, that's another thing that we're looking to put in the manual, and those are timelines both for when the reporting should happen, but also how much time both the ESAs and the industry is given in order to implement the reporting requirements. Another idea to kind of support this whole concept of the manual would be to create centers of expertise within the EC, whereby policy officers developing reporting requirements could turn to colleagues within particular units or those who have the expertise in that particular sector and area to be able to kind of provide guidance and support on this. So the next kind of idea moves more a little bit towards more specific aspects. We kind of mentioned, I already mentioned it a little bit in the previous slide, and that's the standards and identifiers. Now, what we talk about, that's certainly something that came out quite clearly from the fitness check, is that for the moment right now, across the different reporting requirements and across the different legislation and financial services sector, quite a lot of standards are referred to, sometimes standards that basically do the same thing, but we use different standards, which is not only confusing to the industry, but also obviously increases the burden and potentially the cost of using different standards. So the call went out that we should make a bit of more of an effort to try to harmonize this. And generally to use standards where they exist, standards and identifiers. What I mean by identifiers, I'll tell you in a minute. So some examples of standards, whether that be ISO 20022 messaging standard, whether that be XBRL, the data point model, or a variety of other standards that can be out there. In terms of identifiers, this is probably a little bit less familiar to quite many of you. You see a number of acronyms on your slide that I can go through them. That's the LEI is the legal entity identifier. The UTI is the unique transaction identifier. The next one is the unique product identifier. And the CDE is what we call the other critical data elements used for reporting. Now, these are things basically which have been developed internationally over the last, I would say, couple of years, and have recently been adopted, and one of them, I think the UTI has recently been adopted as an ISO standard, the UPI that's still underway. A push at global level right now to try to kind of promote these. For the moment, the UPI is primarily aimed at derivatives trading, but these are certainly things that could be used in other, primarily in the financial sector, but perhaps in other things as well. Who knows at this stage? But these types of identifiers and standards is what should be kind of more regularly and clearly used in reporting in our sector. Now, the initial focus from our side will be on the legal entity identifier, where the EU is already one of the kind of leaders in this field. I think all the global jurisdictions, the most companies with LEI are in the EU. And recently, the European Systemic Risk Board came out with a recommendation that to the Commission that the LEI should be made mandatory for all entities, both for the purposes of identification of the entities, but also for reporting, so that it should be used wherever companies report to supervisors. So what we're doing right now is we're trying to ensure that all of the new and revised legislation includes the references, especially to the LEI, but as things move along, I think we will look at the other identifiers and various other standards as well, if and once we can get some kind of an agreement and consensus on the standards. There is obviously the option of adopting dedicated kind of omnibus horizontal legislation for use of these standards, and we will see whether and where that is more appropriate than making references in specific sectoral legislation in that. So, and the next idea is regulatory concept dictionary, and that again came out of the kind of finding that we had is that the terminology currently used in the financial services supervisory and reporting financial services legislation is quite well, let's be blunt, incoherent. That there are there is terminology that is used that sometimes is completely different and yet means the same things, and sometimes is very similar and means something completely different. So it is confusing, and like business entities do spend a fair amount of time trying to even understand what we mean and what we're asking for before they can even fulfill the reporting requirements. So one of the things that certainly needs to happen is that the terminology and the kind of the formulation of the supervising reporting requirements needs to be more aligned and made clearer. And hence we are now looking at establishing a reference dictionary to come up with standard concepts and definitions that could be used in legislation. And we will then obviously, once that is in place, we will work towards ensuring that it is used consistently in all financial services legislation. And although we can't force it on national authorities, we will try to work with them as well to make sure that wherever any kind of reporting requirements at national level do exist, that is also used in national reporting requirements. We do have currently 2 projects underway that are looking at these kind of aspects of reporting. One is something that has been going on for a while, and it is basically really quite a detailed and a deep review, a manual review of all of the individual reporting requirements to really look and compare where the terminology differs, how they're formulated. Really extensive. I mean, we have endless Excel spreadsheets and lists of these things right now, and it's quite a thorough review going on in that point of view. And another project is something that started only fairly recently, and it is a pilot project using the reporting requirements in one of the legislations, and it is looking at whether it is to what extent it's possible to basically have to formulate the reporting requirements in a machine readable and executable format. So it's kind of looking at studying natural language processing and these type of things. So I hope we, as we say, that is at the early stages, but we do kind of already have some initial results. So we can version of this dictionary sometime in 2021. So the next kind of area of focus is data sharing, something that Pavel already mentioned earlier on in the presentation, and again, something that came out quite clearly. Business entities complained a lot about having to report data, maybe not necessarily identical data, but data that is very similar, or data that is reported, the same data that is reported in perhaps more or less granular fashion several times, and sometimes to different entities. So we are now looking at how we can kind of simplify and reduce that burden and facilitate that. And obviously one of the ways of doing that is to allow data to be reported once and then shared among the different authorities at EU level, perhaps at national level. So we're now definitely looking to kind of facilitate the sharing of data and fostering that once that becomes feasible. So some of the things that we're looking at is removing any legal and technical obstacles to doing so, and we will need to look at kind of allowing putting the appropriate tools, also legislative tools, in place. And here's obviously the clear link to something that Pavel mentioned earlier, and is that European data strategy and the common data spaces that strategy looks at. Some of the kind of necessary minima for success is that we need to look at the security and confidentiality of any shared data. I mean, that, what happens to that once that data starts to circulate, we need to ensure that that remains safe and secure, and that things that shouldn't be shared are not shared. And that is where we kind of move to access rights. For the moment, legislation stipulates quite clearly that certain authorities have certain access rights to certain data. That might need to be adapted, but obviously we will need to be careful about how we adapt it, whether we can really basically, the question is, can we move to a system where everybody has access to everything and they just kind of then decide, have to be careful about how that's released, or do we need to stick to some kind of limited access rights for different entities? Something to be looked at in more detail. And obviously here this is one of the areas where we will need quite in-depth input from the supervisors. So one of the things that we are looking at as well, how to kind of govern all of this, because there's quite a lot of actions, and this will be something that's, again, it's come out quite clearly already in our initial discussions with the stakeholders on the implementation of the strategy, is that it's something, there needs to be a forum or some kind of a body that helps to coordinate this and ensures that the discussion with the industry, with all of the supervisory authorities and the Commission continue, and that best practices and information can be exchanged. So we are now looking to perhaps establish such a forum. To, you know, you see the purposes of what this forum would do, whether it's coordinating data, exchanging and facilitating discussions, identifying any commonalities or anything in whether it be in data models, data flows, standards, formats, all of the stuff that I already talked about could be discussed in this forum. We are looking also at the possibility of this forum actually having a bit more of a power in the sense of being able to actually provide technical advice on various legislative or non-legislative actions. That remains to be seen. And again, one of the things that came out is that we shouldn't be kind of doubling and tripling fora that exist, and there are certain bodies that already exist. So we are considering reusing an existing forum for this. Remains to be seen, but again, something that needs to be seen. Which forum has what powers, who is involved, because we do want to have this as broad as possible. So next slide, please. Right, so kind of we're heading towards the end of the presentation now. Again, as I mentioned, these are just a short list be necessary. We need to continue reflecting, continue the discussions. Some other prerequisites for success of this strategy that I wanted to mention at this point in time is that obviously a lot of these kind of ideas and the strategy as such will require further assessment, potentially will require cost-benefit analysis, especially some of the more technical aspects. And we, as I mentioned already a couple of times, we will continue to need technical advice and input from the people who are directly involved in all of this work. We already held 2 initial workshops in November, one with the supervisory authorities, both national and European industry, and there we had very good exchanges on this. Quite a lot of ideas came back from that, but it's something that we will, the one thing that was obvious quickly is that we will need to continue this. So we are kind of already now starting to think whether we should have other workshops in the course of 2021. Another thing that needs to happen, again, we don't want to recreate the wheel. There are a lot of similar initiatives in some respects already being undertaken, for example, by the European authorities. For example, the European Banking Authority is carrying out now a feasibility study on the possibility of kind of merging a number of different reporting that they have, hence the integrated reporting. So obviously we are eager to see what they come up with, and we don't want to redo all of that work. If they do come up with something that can be reused in our strategy, we will certainly look to reusing that. A number of sectoral initiatives as well going on, in particular sectors of the financial services, whether in banking, capital markets, or insurance. Again, we will need to see what comes out of those. We don't want to duplicate them. There is also a discussion now whether or not we may need to focus more on actually aiming the strategy more sectorally first before we move to the horizontal kind of coordination and alignment. So we need to look at whether that is feasible as well. And obviously, we need to reach out to national authorities in a number of ways, because they are in the end responsible for implementing a lot of this. So they do have some leeway in a number of these reporting requirements. So we need to kind of work with them together to try to build consensus and trying to remove any kind of excessive discrepancies, ideally align fragmented reporting where that exists, and obviously to pull resources, because a strategy like this will require resources, and we cannot do this all ourselves in the Commission. We need to have everybody on board and everybody to pull their part of the weight in order to implement this successfully. So with this, I think we come to the end of my presentation. I think I'll pass back to Pavel, who will kind of wrap this up, and then I think at the end we will still have some time for discussion. I see that there are already quite a few questions, I think, here, so we'll try to get to those in a minute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bartosz. I will basically pass the the floor, yes, to the organizers, because we have two questions on Slido, which we would like to get answered first, and then we'll open the floor to the questions from the chat or ad hoc, as you feel. Also, not only questions, we are welcome to suggestions. As I said, this is work in progress.
Thank you very much, Bartosz and Pavel, for this insightful presentation and opening to the broader audience the financial domain activities. So you had some questions, and I think it's very interesting that if the audience can give their opinion. So what your first question, and if you can open Slido and use the same code as before, what action do you think is necessary in order to successfully simplify and streamline supervisory reporting in the financial sector? So please choose your best choice in the possible answers. We'll let you some time. Maybe we can move to the answers. There is, for now, okay, let's wait a bit, but the system should broadly be kept as it is now, but several of its elements need to be modified, improved. So this is really, it seems, the best choice. So we see a fear for drastic changes, especially when you have a system which has been very difficult to set. I guess it's very understandable. Pavel and Bartosz, are you surprised by this answer?
Not really, actually, as said Cecile, yes, indeed. Well, no, actually, we were open. We thought, okay, let's see how radical the people are. But actually, indeed, what we see too is that, you know, as you mentioned, Cecile, the system is complex and took a while and took time and resources to put in place, investment to put in place. So indeed, you know, the blowing it up is a risky option.
Yeah, so what I get from this answer is that the acquis, and also it's a general issue, that the acquis is there, and the acquis is both legal and the IT landscape that is behind is an acquis as well. And it has to be done. This has to be taken into account whenever something is changed. In fact, how to build on top of previous efforts, still going through more innovative solutions. Can we go to the next question?
Yeah, before that, just for me, however, it was also interesting that changes, however, are needed. So no vote arrived for minor adaptations. Some changes are expected. So FISMA colleagues, you should be, you will be kept busy for a while, it's clear.
So
absolutely.
Yes. So
Question.
The next question, yes, is what benefits should initiatives to improve of supervisory data collection aim for, in your opinion? And yeah, so reduction of cost is, and most effective financial system supervision. Okay. Let's wait a bit more. Okay, so let's aim at least 15 answers before we comment something. Okay, so now, Pavel, maybe you would like to comment this one?
Yeah. Interesting to see that just reduction of cost is not the primary objective that we should follow, and we agree with that actually. So simplification and more effective financial supervision. Yeah, this looks like reasonable goals to follow. I'm a bit surprised that more information available publicly on the state of the financial system is last, because this is something that we heard quite often in the fitness check, that people or the entities were asking, and also there is a question in the chat. We'll get to that. That reporting is like a black hole. All this data goes in and nobody knows what happens to it.
Mm-hmm. But I guess that the last question is not maybe from the audience, because we don't have the people that may be interested or benefiting from this publicly available ability of the information. It can be the reason that we have more.
Well, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Small sample.
Thank you very much for your participation. You can still, I guess, continue giving your opinion in the Slido, but I think it's